Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're essentially grabbing a magnifying glass and taking a really close look at the deep philosophical and historical claims surrounding America's founding documents. We are going to impartially unpack a fascinating recent interview that dives into the complex origins, the profound contradictions, and the architectural brilliance of the American system. So if you want to understand not just what happened in 1776, but the actual intellectual DNA behind why it happened, you are definitely in the right place.
Let's jump straight in. You know how we usually think of the Declaration of Independence as this standard, formal declaration of war? Well, consider this. It is actually the ultimate breakup letter to King George III. And unlike the classic, "it's not you, it's me" excuse, this document explicitly says, no, it's definitely you. It was this incredibly detailed explanation to the whole world of exactly why the American colonies felt absolutely compelled to end the relationship.
Here is how we're going to break this down today. 1. A historic breakup letter. 2. The origin of rights. 3. The slavery contradiction. 4. Designing the guardrails. And 5. An idea or a people.
Starting right off with Chapter 1, a historic breakup letter.
The core argument they presented to the king was simple, but honestly revolutionary for its time. They argued that governments are instituted for one primary job, and that's to protect individual rights. They literally listed out 27 specific grievances, basically begging the king to stop abusing his power. The founders argued that when a government becomes hostile to those rights, it's not just a right, but an actual duty to replace it with a new system where man rules himself.
All right, moving on to Chapter 2, the origin of rights. Now, you might be wondering, where did these ideas even come from? History so often credits Enlightenment thinkers, like John Locke, for concepts like human rights. But there's a really strong argument here that for the average American back in 1770s, these ideas were explicitly Judeo-Christian. Early American pulpits weren't just preaching secular Enlightenment theories. They were actively preaching that rights were a direct loan from a creator to the individual, entirely outside the reach of any king. To really wrap your head around how widespread this religious framing was, just consider this staggering statistic. 70%. 70% of the American population at the time heard an English street preacher named George Whitefield deliver these exact ideas live. He traveled on horseback across all 13 colonies, preaching in the open air about individual sovereignty. The sheer scale of this guy's influence was wild. Even Benjamin Franklin, who was highly skeptical that Whitefield could naturally project his voice to massive crowds, had to check it out. Being the ever-scientific guy he was, Franklin literally walked the perimeter of one of Whitefield's open-air sermons, did the math, and calculated that an astonishing 25,000 people were standing there, listening to this powerful storytelling that intertwined faith with the concept of inherent rights. Which brings us to Chapter 3, the slavery contradiction. Now, this raises a massive question about the founding era's most agonizing tension. Why did the founders deliberately ditch John Locke's famous phrase, life, liberty, and property, and choose instead life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I mean, it's a subtle change, sure, but it has massive implications. Well, here's the thing. Back in 1776, under the law at the time, the word property legally included enslaved people. The theory presented in the source is that if the founders had enshrined an unalienable right to property right out of the gate, it would have made the future legal abolition of slavery pretty much impossible. They knew they couldn't win a future war against slavery if they explicitly protected it in their very first breath as a nation. Actually, Thomas Jefferson originally drafted a half-page paragraph fiercely condemning the king for the slave trade. But as we know, it got removed. Why? Because John Hancock demanded a unanimous vote on every single line. Remember, they were literally committing treason, the king that spies everywhere. If there was even a speck of division among the colonies, the British would exploit it, break them apart, and hang them all. Strikingly, when it came to that anti-slavery paragraph, 11 of the 13 colonies were actually ready to abolish slavery right then and there. Only 2, Georgia and North Carolina, voted against it. The majority ultimately deferred the issue just to keep those 2 states at the table. They calculated that unity was literally the only way to survive the impending war. It was a legislative compromise that kicked the can down the road, and of course, it eventually cost the nation a devastating civil war. So if they couldn't use the word property, what did the pursuit of happiness actually mean in this context? Think of Emma Lazarus's famous poem on the Statue of Liberty. In this interpretation, happiness isn't some guarantee of wealth or having a good time. It meant the freedom to finally shed the strict class systems of Europe. It's the ability to outrun your ancestry or your past mistakes and simply have the chance to pursue your true potential as an individual. Okay, Chapter 4, Designing the Guardrails. They, for sure, did not get this right on the first try. They started with the Articles of Confederation, and that was so weak it left the states hovering dangerously close to anarchy. Realizing this wasn't working, they held a secret constitutional convention to build a much stronger framework. But they were absolutely terrified of granting this new government too much power, so they added the final vital piece, the Bill of Rights.
Now, what makes the American Bill of Rights so incredibly unique is that it's essentially a charter of negative liberties. Unlike some constitutions out there that tell the government what it must do, this is a strict boundary of what the government must never do. Our source brilliantly likens it to a massive electric fence that the state simply cannot cross. To really grasp where this power inherently resides, think of it like hiring a police force. The idea is that rights are loaned from God to the individual, but obviously because you can't stand guard at your house all day and still live a normal life, you loan a portion of that right to the government. The ultimate power always remains with the people. It's merely on loan to the state. And to stop that loaned power from getting out of hand and becoming tyrannical, the founders intensely studied the successes and failures of past republics. They put together a really precise balance of power. The House of Representatives stays closest to the people and controls the purse strings. The Senate was designed to represent the interests of the individual states. The president holds the veto to check unconstitutional laws, and the Supreme Court exists solely to interpret those laws. It is a highly intricate machine designed to prevent any one group from gaining total control. The source presents a really unique framework for understanding this whole design. While the traditional European political spectrum usually places communism on the left and fascism on the right, the American founders viewed things a bit differently. In their eyes, both of those extremes represented total government control on one side, with anarchy all the way on the far opposite side. The American system was deliberately designed to sit just barely out of reach of anarchy, maintaining the maximum amount of freedom possible without completely collapsing into chaos.
And finally, Chapter 5, An Idea or a People. So we're looking at a huge contrast here between two different types of philosophy. There's abstract philosophy, what the source colorfully describes as masturbating philosophy, which is basically pondering concepts just to feel smart, like asking, why is a wheel a wheel? But then there's philosophy as an applied science. And the hard truth is, theorizing means absolutely nothing if you don't actually apply it to the real world.
So back to the big question, is a nation an idea or a people? Ultimately, it's undeniably both. The brilliant ideas of the founding, the electric fences, the separation of powers, the unalienable rights, they're just ink on paper unless a people exist who are willing to know them, embody them, and actively live them out in reality. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. We have explored the historic breakup letter, those agonizing compromises over slavery, and the careful, mechanical design of the government. But if the founding is an applied philosophy, it forces us to ask, how are we choosing to apply, or maybe even ignore, these philosophical guardrails in our modern world today? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this breakdown helps you see the architecture of these ideas a little more clearly